Maria had always believed that life could become better someday. Even when she was young, she used to look at the sky and imagine a future filled with warmth, kindness, and peace. But as the years passed, those dreams felt farther away, as if the sky itself kept rising higher and higher. Still, she never completely stopped hoping. Hope was the one thing she carried with her, even when she had nothing else left. She grew up in a small, rural town where everyone knew everyone, and where news traveled faster than the wind. Her mother had been a gentle woman who worked in a small bakery. Maria remembered the smell of warm bread and freshly baked cakes that always filled their home. Those memories were the softest part of her heart, something she returned to whenever life outside felt too heavy. Her mother had been her world, the one person who truly understood her, someone who taught her how to stay patient, kind, and steady no matter how difficult things became. But after her mother passed away, everything changed. Maria was still a young girl when her mother's husband, the man she called her stepfather, took charge of the home. He wasn't cruel in dramatic ways, but he was cold in a way that made life feel small. His two children, both older than Maria, followed his attitude. They treated Maria like someone who simply existed in the corner, someone who didn't belong to their family. They didn't shout at her, but they didn't include her either. They didn't harm her, but they didn't help her. Their silence created a wall that only grew taller with time. At first, Maria thought this was just how things would be for a while. She believed that slowly they would all learn to get along, that they would become a real family someday. But the months passed, and then the years passed, and nothing changed. She remained the girl who did the chores, the girl who worked in the fields, the girl who cleaned the house, cooked the meals, and repaired small things when they broke. She wasn't treated badly in a physical way, but she wasn't treated with warmth either. Everything was routine, empty, and without affection. Even so, Maria carried kindness in her heart. She took care of the house, not because she was forced, but because she didn't want the home her mother once loved to fall apart. She woke early, swept the floors, washed the dishes, and collected water from the village pump. She worked on the small farms when needed, feeding animals and tending to plants. Her hands became rough, but her nature stayed gentle. The real difficulty began when the family's financial situation worsened. The small income her stepfather earned was no longer enough. Work in the town was limited, and the crops didn't grow as well as they used to. Bills piled up, and tension filled the air, stretching across the house like an unspoken cloud. Her stepfather became quieter. Her step-siblings became more impatient. No one knew what to do. They never discussed solutions as a family, because they never saw themselves as one. Maria, despite everything, tried her best. She helped in neighbors' gardens when asked, helped older people carry groceries, and sometimes helped mothers look after their children. She never asked for money, but occasionally people gave her small coins as a thank you. She saved every little piece she received, hiding them under her pillow inside a small paper pouch her mother once folded for her. She didn't know what she was saving for, maybe something important someday, maybe a chance to breathe freely. But the reality was harsh. The small coins she saved were nothing compared to the needs of the household. The step-family didn't want to lose their home. They didn't want to move or admit defeat. So, in their growing worry, they began to see Maria not just as the girl who lived with them, but as someone who could somehow help their situation in ways she shouldn't have had to. They didn't hurt her or treat her in an openly harsh way, but they began to treat her more like a responsibility they never asked for. To them, she became someone who ate food but didn't bring in enough money, someone who did chores but didn't lighten their financial burden. Maria noticed their behavior shift. Their silence became heavier. Their expressions became tighter. They began asking her to work more outside the house, help this neighbor, clean that yard, assist that shop owner, anything that could bring even a little money. They didn't say it unkindly, but they said it with expectation, as if she had no choice. She never refused, because she didn't want to cause trouble. She wanted to help if she could, and she wanted everyone to be peaceful. But the town didn't have enough jobs for a young woman with no formal education and no experience beyond household tasks. Most people who hired help were already struggling themselves. Work came only once in a while, and the payments were small. Maria still tried, because she didn't have another path. As days turned into a long stretch of months, the Step family's frustration grew. They were not unkind people deep down, but fear often twists people's thoughts. They weren't angry at Maria, they were angry at their situation. They blamed the economy, the bad harvest, the lack of opportunities. But slowly, without realizing it, they also began blaming the easiest target, the quiet girl who lived under their roof. Their conversations became sharper, though never harmful. They said things like, "We have too many mouths to feed," and "We can't afford unnecessary responsibilities." They never said this directly to Maria, but she heard them anyway. The walls were thin, and her heart was even thinner. Every night, Maria lay awake wondering if she should leave. But where would she go? Crusting, she had no relatives, no friends who could take her in, and no money to survive alone. She wasn't trapped by force, she was trapped by circumstances. That kind of confinement is invisible, but it feels just as real. One morning, she noticed her stepfather sitting quietly at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of envelopes. His face was thoughtful, almost defeated. Her step-siblings whispered in the next room. Maria didn't know what was happening, but she sensed something had shifted again. Over the next few days, the atmosphere changed from heavy to desperate. Their words grew more stressed. Their discussions grew sharper. They didn't speak to Maria much, but she could feel that they were considering something that involved her. They began taking her along whenever they visited town, introducing her to shopkeepers and neighbors as someone who could do small tasks for a very low price. They told people she was hardworking, honest, and reliable, which was true. But the way they spoke made Maria feel strange, as if she were being offered, not simply recommended. Some people offered her temporary tasks, which she completed with care. But others looked uncomfortable, sensing something uneasy in the situation. A few kind neighbors gently suggested that the Step family was pushing Maria too hard, but the family only laughed it off, saying they were helping her gain experience. Maria didn't complain. She kept working. She kept hoping. She kept believing that if she stayed patient, something better might come. But the Step family's desperation continued growing. Their money was nearly gone. Their options were disappearing. They felt cornered by life, and in that corner, they made decisions without thinking about the emotional weight they placed on Maria. She didn't know it yet, but life was about to take a very unusual turn, one that would lead her towards someone who would see her not as a burden, not as a responsibility, and not as something to be offered, but as a human being who deserved dignity, respect, and a chance to live freely. Part 2 begins at a time when Maria's life was slowly slipping out of her control, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. The air in the house felt different every day, more restless, more uncertain, and more filled with quiet discussions she wasn't part of. Her stepfamily didn't speak loudly, but they spoke often, which was unusual. They were normally a quiet household, but now every evening seemed to end with whispered conversations in corners. Maria sensed that something important was being planned. She hoped whatever they were thinking would help improve the family's money problems, but she never imagined that the plan would involve her in a way she did not choose. She believed that no matter how difficult things became, her stepfamily would still treat her with basic respect. She never expected that fear and pressure could push people into making decisions that could affect her life so deeply. It started one afternoon when Maria's stepfather asked her to come with him to the town square. He didn't explain why. He simply said, "Walk with me. We have something to do." His tone wasn't harsh, just tired. Maria agreed without question, because she always tried to help, however she could. The town square was busy, filled with vendors, children playing, and neighbors talking near market stalls. Maria usually liked watching everyday life moving around her. It made her feel less lonely. But today felt different. Her stepfather guided her from one shop to another, speaking to store owners, farmers, and stall keepers in a low voice. Maria noticed the puzzled expressions on people's faces. Some glanced at her with soft concern, some with confusion, and some with discomfort. She didn't know what her stepfather was saying, but she understood it had something to do with her. Whenever she tried to listen, he would move slightly away or lower his voice even more. People responded politely, yet uneasily. A few shook their heads. Others avoided eye contact entirely. One kind woman even patted Maria's shoulder gently and whispered, "You're a good girl. Stay strong." Maria didn't understand why she said that, but the words stayed with her. They continued walking through town, stopping at a bakery, a tailor's shop, and finally near an old storage building where some men were repairing equipment. Everywhere they went, people looked at her stepfather with a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. It was clear that he was trying to ask for help in some unusual way, but whatever he was asking, most people didn't agree to it. Maria felt confused the entire time. She wanted to ask what was going on, but she didn't want to trouble him or make him feel embarrassed. She simply stood beside him quietly, offering a soft smile whenever someone looked her way. By the end of the day, her stepfather seemed exhausted. His shoulders had dropped, and his expression carried worry and frustration. On their way home, he didn't say a single word. The silence stretched so long that Maria finally gathered courage and asked softly, "Did I do something wrong?" He looked at her, surprised. "No, Maria," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't do anything wrong. It's just, life is complicated right now." She didn't ask again. She didn't want to make things heavier for him, but inside, her heart grew anxious. She knew something had changed, and she wasn't sure how to prepare for it. The next day, her step-siblings joined in the strange behavior. They took her to different homes around town, introducing her to people she'd never met. They spoke about her as if they were presenting someone for a job interview. They explained that she was hardworking, patient, and respectful. They described the chores she could do, the tasks she could learn, and the ways she could help around households. Maria listened quietly. She wasn't embarrassed, but she was confused. It felt like they were pressuring people to take her in temporarily, almost like they wanted to send her away. Not permanently, just for work. She didn't know how she felt about that. She loved helping others, but she didn't want to be treated like an object to be handed around. Still, she stayed polite. She smiled pleasantly, answered questions softly, and showed gratitude whenever people praised her. She was always respectful, even when she didn't understand the purpose of everything happening around her. But what confused her most was the awkwardness she saw in the eyes of the people her step-siblings spoke to. Some avoided looking directly at her. Some looked at her with sympathy. It was as if they sensed something she didn't. They knew her family was struggling, and they sensed that the step-family's actions came from worry, not from a place of warmth. Then something unexpected happened, something that made the whole town talk in hushed tones for days. On the third day of these strange errands, her family took her to the central marketplace during a busy afternoon. People were gathered, buying vegetables, selling handmade items, and chatting loudly in groups. Among them, Maria noticed a few familiar faces, neighbors, children she had helped look after, and older women who often asked her to help carry groceries. Suddenly, her stepfather cleared his throat and said something aloud to a small group of shopkeepers. His words spread quickly from one person to another, like wind moving through leaves. People began turning their heads toward Maria. Some looked shocked, some upset, some simply confused. It was then, through murmurs and whispers, that Maria learned what her stepfamily had done. They had offered her labor to anyone who could pay even a very small amount. They were not selling her as a person, nor wishing to harm her in any way. But the way they phrased things, and the way they presented her, made it seem incredibly thoughtless and insensitive. They had allowed their fear and desperation to cloud their judgment, and the townspeople saw it clearly. Maria's heart trembled. She wasn't angry, but she was deeply hurt. She had spent years trying to be helpful, trustworthy, and kind to them. Yet here she was, being spoken about in a way that made her feel small, like she didn't belong, like she was a problem to be solved. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood still, wishing her mother were still alive to guide her. She kept her hands clasped together, trying to hide the tremble in her fingers. Some people came forward and gently told her stepfamily that what they were doing wasn't right. They weren't harsh, they were simply concerned. A few suggested finding different solutions. Others recommended asking community centers for help. But her stepfamily, overwhelmed by financial trouble and stress, insisted they were only trying to find a way to earn enough to keep their home. During all of this, Maria stayed silent. She didn't argue or defend herself. She didn't blame anyone. She simply felt a quiet ache in her chest, like a soft bruise. She wished she could make things better for everyone, but she didn't know how. As word spread throughout town, more people began gathering, creating a small crowd. Maria felt all eyes on her, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly exposed. Not physically, emotionally. Her dignity felt fragile, like a thin sheet of paper that could easily tear. She didn't know it, but someone unexpected was watching from the edges of the marketplace, a man who would soon change the direction of her life in ways she could never have predicted. But for now, Maria simply stood there, her heart full of quiet confusion, her mind full of questions she didn't dare ask. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that something had shifted in the world around her, and she felt both fear and hope rising within her, like two tides meeting in the middle. The marketplace was busy that afternoon, filled with people moving from one stall to another, carrying baskets of fruits, vegetables, and handmade goods. Among the crowd was a man who didn't belong to the town. His name was Daniel, a quiet, thoughtful person who preferred to stay unnoticed. He had visited the town only to look at an old property he owned nearby. He didn't plan to stay long, and he had no interest in getting involved in anyone's personal matters. But sometimes, life places people in the right place, at the right moment, even when they don't expect it. Daniel had lived most of his later years, quietly, away from noise and crowds. He was a widower who had lost his wife several years earlier, and though time had softened his sadness, it hadn't erased it. He spent his days in peace, dividing his time between reading, gardening, and managing his investments from home. People in his city knew him as kind but distant, helpful but reserved. He never pushed himself into other people's lives, and he never expected anything from anyone. On this particular day, Daniel had stopped by the marketplace to buy something to eat before returning home. He didn't know the town well, so he walked slowly, observing faces, listening to conversations, and trying to feel the spirit of the place. As he passed through the center of the square, he noticed a group of people standing unusually close together. Their expressions showed concern, discomfort, and confusion. Some were whispering. Some were shaking their heads softly. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed crowds or drama, but something about the situation made him pause. There was no loud noise, no chaos, no argument, only a quiet tension. His eyes drifted toward the center of the small crowd, where he noticed a young woman standing shyly beneath the shade of a tree. She looked uncomfortable but calm, like someone who had learned long ago how to hide her feelings behind a steady expression. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry, but her eyes carried a kind of sadness that spoke louder than tears ever could. Daniel didn't know her name yet, but this was Maria. He watched as an older man, her stepfather, spoke to a group of shopkeepers. Daniel couldn't hear everything from where he stood, but he caught enough to understand the general idea. The man was offering work on behalf of the young woman, in exchange for a very small amount. The way he spoke made Daniel uneasy. It wasn't the offer itself that troubled him. Many people needed extra income and offered their help in simple ways. It was the tone, the desperation behind it, and the way the young woman was being presented without her full voice. Daniel took a step closer, still remaining polite and quiet. He never wanted to interfere in family matters, but his instincts told him that something wasn't right. He continued to observe from a respectful distance, noticing how Maria stood with her hands gently folded, not saying anything. Not resisting. Simply accepting whatever decision was being made around her. Her eyes met his for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, but in that short glance, Daniel saw something that made his heart feel unexpectedly heavy. She was used to being overlooked. She was used to being spoken about instead of spoken to. She carried an innocence that had been shaped by years of responsibility and silence. People around her began giving gentle suggestions to her stepfamily. Some recommended asking community groups for help. Others offered small temporary jobs but insisted she should come by her own choice, not through pressure. A few neighbors openly said this situation made them uncomfortable. Maria's step-siblings looked embarrassed but didn't say anything. Her stepfather, though not unkind, seemed confused, lost, and unsure how to handle his burdens. He wasn't trying to hurt Maria. Daniel could see that, but he was making choices that placed her dignity on uncertain ground. Daniel felt a quiet stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. What he felt was concern, a simple human concern that came from recognizing someone's pain even if they didn't speak it aloud. He looked at Maria again. She wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a simple dress and a faded shawl. But despite her modest appearance, there was something graceful in the way she stood. Something steady, something honest. She didn't defend herself. She didn't try to explain. She simply existed with quiet strength. At that moment, Daniel felt a gentle pull inside him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was simply the calm understanding that he couldn't walk away without learning more. He approached the crowd slowly, making sure not to appear intrusive. He asked a vendor standing nearby, "Is something wrong?" The vendor, a friendly older man, sighed softly. "It's complicated," he said. "That young woman works very hard, but her family is struggling. They're asking people to pay for her help in ways that make everyone uneasy. It doesn't feel right." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Does she agree to it?" The vendor shrugged. "She doesn't refuse. But she also doesn't seem happy." Marken. One Dizan. Daniel's heart pressed itself gently against his ribs. He thanked the vendor and continued observing. A few moments later, Maria's stepfather tried once again to offer her assistance in exchange for a small amount. His voice trembled with both embarrassment and need. Daniel suddenly understood the seriousness of the family's financial situation. They weren't careless people. They were simply overwhelmed. Still, something in the way Maria was being handled felt deeply unfair. Daniel, without stepping too close, kept watching. The more he observed, the more uneasy he felt. But he didn't want to act recklessly. He didn't know these people. He didn't know their story. And he didn't want to judge without understanding. Then something small but important happened. Maria stumbled slightly when a child rushed past her. She regained her balance quickly, but in that tiny moment, Daniel instinctively stepped forward, as if his body moved before his mind did. He didn't reach her or touch her, he simply moved closer, ready to help if needed. When she looked up at him again, her expression showed both surprise and relief. She wasn't used to anyone noticing her. Daniel softened his voice and asked her stepfather, "May I ask something?" The stepfather looked at him tiredly. "What is it?" Daniel pointed gently toward Maria. "Is she all right with everything you're doing? Has she agreed to this?" There was a pause, an uncomfortable one. The stepfather looked at Maria. Maria looked at the ground. Her silence said everything she couldn't bring herself to voice. Daniel felt his heart soften. He didn't want to lecture or embarrass anyone. He simply said, "She seems like someone who deserves to make her own choices." His words were simple, but they caused a ripple through the small group. Her stepfather's expression shifted slightly, as if he were seeing the situation from outside for the first time. Daniel didn't push further. He didn't judge. Instead, he turned his attention back to Maria, offering her a gentle smile, not out of sympathy, but respect. Maria blinked, surprised. She wasn't used to strangers treating her like she mattered. Daniel felt something settle inside him, then a quiet decision. He would not ignore this situation. He would not walk away, pretending he hadn't seen her eyes. But he also knew he needed to approach this carefully and respectfully, without forcing himself into her life. Later that day, as he walked away from the market, his mind kept returning to the image of Maria standing quietly among the crowd, her dignity fragile, but still glowing. He realized that fate had placed him in that moment for a reason he didn't yet understand. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a turning point not just for Maria but for him as well. In the days after Daniel saw Maria in the marketplace, he found himself thinking about her more often than he expected. It wasn't in a dramatic or romantic way, it was simply human concern. He had seen many difficult situations in life, but something in her quiet sadness and gentle strength had touched him deeply. She reminded him of someone who had learned to survive silently, without asking anything from anyone. He admired that, yet he also felt uneasy, knowing she was facing so much alone. Daniel had always been a private man. He didn't step into strangers' problems, didn't offer advice unless asked, and didn't like getting involved in delicate matters. But sometimes life presents a situation that cannot be ignored. The memory of Maria's tired eyes, her polite stillness, and the soft pressure of her circumstances lingered in his thoughts, like a gentle tap on the shoulder. He knew he had to act, but he also knew he had to act wisely. The next morning, he visited a small local office he knew about a community service center that helped families in need. Daniel had supported them before with donations, so the staff recognized him immediately. The center wasn't big, but it was run by people with warm hearts. One of them was a woman named Mrs. Turner, a social worker known for her kindness and calm understanding. Daniel explained the situation carefully, without adding anything dramatic or accusatory. He spoke softly, choosing his words with respect. He didn't mention names loudly, didn't judge the stepfamily, and didn't describe Maria in a way that would make her feel embarrassed. He only shared what he had seen. A young woman standing in the market, while her family tried to place her into work arrangements that didn't seem fair to her. Mrs. Turner listened quietly, nodding as she took notes. She knew him well enough to trust that he wasn't exaggerating. When he finished, she sighed gently and said, "This kind of situation happens more often than people think. When families feel pressured, they make choices that aren't always thoughtful. Not harmful, just unwise." Daniel appreciated the gentle approach. "I just want her to have a choice," he said. She didn't seem to have much of a voice in the matter. Mrs. Turner smiled kindly. "That's something we can help with." She promised to visit Maria's home and speak privately with her and her family. She assured Daniel that everything would be handled respectfully. She also said she would try to understand the whole situation before making any decisions. Daniel felt relieved. He didn't want to interfere directly, he only wanted someone with the right experience to guide the family. He trusted Mrs. Turner fully. A day later, Mrs. Turner made her way to Maria's small home. The step-family wasn't expecting visitors, so they were surprised when she arrived. Maria was sweeping the small yard outside when she noticed the soft footsteps approaching. When she saw the social worker's friendly smile, she paused, confused but polite. Mrs. Turner introduced herself gently and explained that she was there to check on the family's well-being. Maria's stepfather invited her in, With mixed emotions, he was embarrassed but also relieved. It was clear he didn't know where to turn for help, and talking to someone who didn't judge him felt like a small comfort. Inside the home, Mrs. Turner spoke kindly to each member of the family. She asked about their financial situation, their struggles, and their plans. She didn't argue or criticize, she simply listened. The stepfather explained that the family had fallen behind on bills, and work had been hard to find. He admitted that they didn't want to lose their home and had been trying everything they could think of to earn money. When Mrs. Turner gently asked about Maria's role in all of this, the room fell quiet. The stepfather rubbed his forehead and said softly, "We didn't mean to disrespect her. We just didn't know what else to do." Maria, who had been standing quietly near the doorway, looked down at her hands. She didn't want to cause trouble for the family, but she also didn't know how to express how she felt. Mrs. Turner invited Maria outside for a moment so they could speak privately. They sat on a bench under a small tree that offered shade from the warm afternoon sun. The social worker spoke gently. "Maria, I want to understand how you feel. You don't have to say anything you're not comfortable saying." Maria took a slow breath. She wasn't used to someone asking for her feelings. For a moment, she didn't know how to answer. She looked toward the horizon, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want my family to lose their home. I want to help. But I felt uncomfortable in the marketplace. I didn't understand what was happening." Mrs. Turner nodded kindly. "You are a thoughtful person, Maria. But you deserve to be part of decisions about your life. You deserve to choose how you help." Maria's eyes softened with quiet surprise. No one had said those words to her before. Mrs. Turner explained that there were programs available for people in need, assistance for food, temporary financial support, and even part-time job opportunities for Maria that she could choose willingly. She explained everything in simple words, making sure Maria understood. Maria listened with growing hope. After speaking with the family again, Mrs. Turner helped them fill out forms for assistance. She guided them through the process step by step. She didn't promise any miracles, but she assured them that help was available, and they didn't need to place pressure on Maria. Before leaving, she also gave Maria a small brochure about job training programs. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Later that afternoon, when Mrs. Turner left the home, Maria felt lighter than she had in months. Her stepfamily, though embarrassed at first, also felt relieved. They hadn't intended to harm her, they had simply been lost in their own worries. Now, with guidance, they began to see there were other paths, better paths. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed in town a little longer than he had planned. Something inside him felt incomplete. He wanted to make sure Maria was safe and supported, but he wanted to do it in a quiet way that respected her dignity. So he didn't visit her home or appear unexpectedly. Instead, he spoke again with Mrs. Turner, asking how things had gone. Mrs. Turner smiled warmly. "It went well. She's a very gentle girl, very patient. Her family needed help, and they're getting it now." Daniel felt a softness spread through his chest. "I'm glad she's all right," he said simply. Mrs. Turner added, "She seemed relieved when I spoke to her. She's strong, but she's been carrying too much." Her words settled deeply in Daniel's heart. He thanked her sincerely for her help. That evening, Daniel walked through the town again, passing by the same marketplace where he first saw Maria. The stalls were closing. The vendors were packing up, and the sky above them glowed with shades of orange and pink. The quiet beauty of the moment made him reflect on how unexpected life could be. Sometimes people cross our paths without warning, and their presence changes something inside us, even if only a little. He didn't know what the future held for Maria, but he felt a gentle trust that things were beginning to move in a better direction for her. She had the help she needed. She had a voice now. She had hope. And without realizing it, Daniel had taken the first quiet step toward becoming a meaningful part of her life, not as someone who wanted to take control, but as someone who simply cared. Maria's life began to change the moment she was taken away from the house where she had lived in fear for so many years. At first, she did not fully understand what freedom meant. She only knew that she was now in a place where people spoke kindly to her, where no one raised their voice at her, and where she could breathe without feeling nervous. She stayed in a small guest room at a safe center, arranged by the social worker. The room was simple, with soft yellow walls, a clean bed, and a small window that let the morning light in. For the first time in a long time, Maria woke up without hearing anyone calling her name in an unfriendly tone. She lay still for a few minutes, trying to get used to the silence. Life at the center moved slowly, and everyone there treated her with respect. They asked her about her needs, her comfort, and her plans. These questions felt strange to her, because no one had ever asked her what she wanted. She had lived so long being told what to do that the idea of choosing for herself felt new and almost frightening. But the staff understood her nervousness. They spoke gently, never rushing her, giving her time to understand that she was safe. The social worker, Miss Helen, visited her every day. She would bring tea and sit with Maria, speaking in a quiet, patient voice. She encouraged Maria to share her thoughts and feelings, but only when she felt ready. In the beginning, Maria spoke very little. She was shy, unsure of her own words, but Helen never pushed. She simply stayed beside her, showing that she cared. Soon, Maria started to relax. She began to talk about small things, her mother, her early childhood, the things she loved doing before life became difficult. Those conversations opened small windows in her heart, allowing light to enter once again. During this time, Daniel visited too, but he always asked Helen first to make sure Maria felt comfortable. He never wanted to make her feel pressured. His visits were calm and respectful. He would bring fruit, books, or simple flowers from his garden. He never asked her to talk about the past. Instead, he asked about her favorite colors, her dreams, or the things she enjoyed. He spoke to her as if she were someone important, someone whose words had value. This was still new for Maria, but she appreciated his kindness. Over the next few weeks, Maria slowly discovered what it felt like to make small choices, what dress to wear, what book to read, whether to sit outside in the garden or stay indoors. Each decision, no matter how small, was a step toward her new life. She also attended counseling sessions, where she learned about confidence, self-respect, and emotional healing. The counselors taught her breathing exercises, ways to calm her mind, and how to rebuild trust in herself. She learned that she had the right to feel safe, to feel valued, and to dream of a better future. When she felt a little stronger, Helen suggested a few classes the center offered: basic learning, simple job skills, and small arts programs. Maria was nervous about joining, afraid she would make mistakes or embarrass herself. But Helen encouraged her gently, reminding her that everyone in those classes was learning too. On her first day, she sat quietly at the back of the room. The teacher smiled warmly, and her classmates welcomed her kindly. There were no harsh words, no unkind looks. They treated her like a friend. Maria slowly discovered that she was good with her hands. She enjoyed making crafts, painting, and sewing. She found peace in creating something beautiful from simple materials. Other students admired her work, and the teacher praised her for her patience and detail. Hearing kind words about her abilities felt almost unreal to her. But each compliment built her confidence, one small piece at a time. Meanwhile, Helen worked on the legal process to make sure Maria would never have to return to an unsafe place again. It was long and tiring, but Helen handled most of the difficult parts. Maria only had to appear for a few calm meetings, where officials spoke kindly and assured her she was protected. With each passing day, Maria felt her heart grow lighter. During this time, Daniel continued to support from a gentle distance. He never overstepped. He simply showed up in ways that made her feel seen and cared for. Sometimes he would sit with her in the garden, talking about simple things like the changing seasons, his late wife, or the towns he had visited. Maria listened quietly, learning about a world she had never known. His stories made her realize how big life could be, how many possibilities existed outside the walls of her past. As months passed, Maria completed her training and received help applying for work. She was offered a position at a local community center, assisting with small craft workshops and helping organize events. The job was simple but meaningful. She felt proud every morning when she put on her name badge. She walked to work with a calm smile, greeting people she once would have been too shy to speak to. The community center staff welcomed her warmly. They enjoyed her gentle nature, her careful hands, and her willingness to learn. Children especially liked her, often gathering around her as she showed them how to make simple crafts from paper and thread. Their laughter filled the room, and Maria felt joy she had never known before. She also began taking small steps into independence, learning to manage her money, shopping for her own needs, and making decisions with confidence. She moved into a small rented room, arranged by the organization supporting her. It was not large, but it was hers. She decorated it with handmade crafts, pressed flowers, and soft colors. It became her peaceful space. Daniel and Maria continued to meet occasionally, but their connection grew naturally, without pressure or expectation. They shared quiet moments, warm conversations, and gentle understanding. He admired her resilience and the calm strength she carried. She appreciated his respectful nature, his patience, and the kindness he had shown, without asking for anything in return. Over time, they became important parts of each other's lives, not out of need, but out of choice. Their friendship deepened into something warm and trusting. They walked together in the park, visited small cafes, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence, watching the world pass by. Maria felt safe with him, and Daniel felt a sense of calm he had not felt since his wife passed away. The story of Maria's new life was not sudden or dramatic. It grew slowly, like a plant cared for with patience and gentle light. She learned to stand on her own feet, to make her own decisions, and to trust her own voice. She learned that kindness could exist in the world, that people could help without wanting to control her, and that she had the right to shape her own life. In the end, Maria became a symbol of quiet strength in her community. People admired the way she rebuilt herself without bitterness, with grace instead of anger. She proved that even after years of difficulty, a person could rise again with the right support, kind hearts, and a little hope. Her life no longer belonged to fear or uncertainty. It belonged to her, her choices, her dreams, her future. And beside her was Daniel, not as someone who saved her, but as someone who respected her journey and walked with her at her chosen pace. Together, they built a bond based on trust, understanding, and gentle companionship. Maria's story became a reminder that kindness can change a life, that hope can grow even in quiet corners, and that everyone deserves a chance to live with dignity, peace, and a future they choose for themselves.